The call came at 2:47 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had been watching the clock, waiting, the way you do when someone you love is slipping away and every minute feels borrowed. My husband Gerald was in room 114. The nurses had quietly told me that morning to call the family. I called everyone. My daughter Patricia drove 4 hours without stopping. My niece flew in from Arizona. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years showed up with food and prayers. But my son Daniel, who lived 22 minutes away, stood at the door of that hospital room, looked at me and said 4 words I will carry with me until I take my last breath. Then he turned around and left. My name is Evelyn. I am 71 years old. I live in a small yellow house in central Ohio, the same house Gerald and I bought in 1987 for $94,000 with money we had saved for 6 years. Gerald was a quiet man. The kind of man who fixed things without being asked. Who left a cup of coffee on the counter every morning before I woke up. Who never raised his voice in 44 years of marriage. Not once. We had 2 children. Patricia, our oldest, always serious and steady, became a physical therapist in Tennessee. And Daniel, our youngest, our boy, was the one who kept us laughing. He had Gerald's eyes and my stubbornness, and for most of his life, that combination worked beautifully. Daniel met Renee at a work conference in Columbus 4 years ago. She was polished and confident, the kind of woman who knew exactly what she wanted and moved through rooms like she owned them. I tried to like her. I genuinely did. I invited her to Sunday dinners. I asked about her work. I bought her a birthday gift the first year she and Daniel were together. But Renee was the kind of person who decided early on whether you were worth her time. And she had clearly decided I was not. It started small. She would give short answers when I spoke. She would redirect Daniel mid-conversation when he was talking to me. She would make plans on holidays and then act surprised when Daniel had to miss family gatherings. Daniel always had an explanation. Work was busy. Renee wasn't feeling well. The drive was too long. And I, because I was his mother and I loved him, always said it was fine. Gerald noticed before I admitted it to myself. He said one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with his reading glasses on, "Evie, that woman is building a wall between us and our boy. And Daniel is handing her the bricks." I told him he was being dramatic. He gave me one of his long, quiet looks and went back to his book. Gerald was diagnosed with congestive heart failure 14 months before he died. The doctor explained it carefully, showed us the scans, laid out the treatment options. Gerald listened calmly, asked 2 questions, and on the drive home said, "Well, I guess we make the most of what's left." That was Gerald. We told the children together. Patricia cried immediately. She flew in the following weekend, sat with her father for 3 days, and started calling every Sunday without fail. Daniel called that evening and said all the right things. He said he was devastated. He said he would be there. He said we could count on him. Over the next 14 months he visited 4 times. Renee came twice, and both times she sat in the living room scrolling her phone while Gerald and I tried to make conversation feel normal. I stopped expecting things after month 8. You learn to do that, lower the weight of your own hope so that disappointment doesn't crush you completely. I focused on Gerald. I drove him to his appointments. I learned the names of his medications. I held his hand during the hard nights and pretended to be stronger than I was. Patricia called. Patricia came. Patricia sent cards and groceries and once, in February, showed up unannounced with soup and flowers and cried in my kitchen for 20 minutes before pulling herself together. Daniel texted. By the time Gerald was admitted to the hospital for the last time, he had lost 31 pounds and could no longer climb the stairs without stopping to rest. His ankles swelled. His color had changed. The man who used to spend Saturdays building birdhouses in the backyard now spent most afternoons in the recliner by the window, looking at the yard he no longer had the strength to tend. He never complained. That was the thing that broke me the most. He would catch me watching him with that look, the look a wife gets when she is quietly grieving the husband still sitting in front of her, and he would wink at me. 70 years old, wasting away, and he would wink at me like we were still young. When the hospital called and said we needed to prepare ourselves, I made the calls with steady hands and a hollow chest. Patricia was already on her way before I finished the sentence. I called Daniel next. It was a Thursday evening. He picked up on the 3rd ring. I told him the doctors believed it was a matter of days. I told him his father was asking for him. I told him quietly and clearly, the way you say things when you do not have the emotional strength for softness. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said he would talk to Renee and call me back. He called back 40 minutes later. He said Renee had a work event Friday evening that she had been preparing for weeks, and that he didn't feel right leaving her alone with all of it. He said he would try to come Saturday. I sat down on the edge of the bed. I did not cry. I did not argue. I said, "Okay, Daniel." And I hung up. Gerald passed away on Saturday morning at 6:18 a.m. Daniel arrived at the hospital at 10:45 a.m. He was too late by 4 hours and 27 minutes. The days that followed the funeral were a blur of casseroles and condolence cards and the specific exhaustion that comes not just from grief but from performance, from having to nod and accept hugs and say thank you for coming over and over while your entire interior world has gone completely silent. Daniel stood at the reception after the funeral looking uncomfortable. Renee stood beside him in a dark dress, sunglasses propped on her head indoors, checking her phone twice while the pastor was still speaking. I watched them from across the room. I did not go to them. I did not have it in me. 3 weeks after Gerald's funeral, Daniel came to the house alone. I had not asked him to. He knocked on the door on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I opened it he looked younger somehow, smaller, the way adults sometimes look when they've done something they can't undo. He sat at the kitchen table. I made coffee out of habit. We sat across from each other in the house he grew up in, surrounded by 44 years of his father's life, the shelves Gerald built, the photographs on the wall, the coffee mug with the chipped handle that I still hadn't been able to put away. Daniel talked. He talked about the work event. He talked about the pressure Renee was under. He talked about how he had convinced himself there would be more time. I listened. I have always been good at listening. Then he said something that cracked the careful composure I had been holding for 3 weeks. He said, "Mom, I hope you understand that I was in a really difficult position." I set my coffee cup down. I looked at my son, this man I had brought into the world, nursed through fevers, driven to baseball practice, helped move 3 times, lent money to twice, defended to people who saw what I refused to see, and I said very quietly, "Your father asked for you." Daniel looked at the table. "He asked for you 2 days before he died. I told him you were coming." He smiled. "Daniel. He thought you were coming." The room was very still. What I did not tell Daniel that afternoon, what I had not told anyone yet, was what I had discovered 2 days after the funeral, while going through Gerald's desk. Gerald had known. Not guessed. Known. There was a folder in the bottom drawer of his desk, the one he kept locked with a small brass key I'd always thought was for financial documents. Inside was a letter. Written in Gerald's careful handwriting, dated 8 months before he died. The letter was not addressed to me. It was addressed to Daniel. In it, Gerald had written, without anger, without accusation, in the plain and honest way he did everything, that he had noticed Daniel pulling away. That he understood some of it was the influence of a new relationship. That he did not blame Renee entirely, because a man makes his own choices, and Daniel had been making a slow series of choices for several years. But then Gerald had written something that made me sit down on the floor of his office and press my hand over my mouth. He wrote that he had changed his will. Not in anger. Not as punishment. But because, he wrote, a man's legacy should reflect the truth of his relationships, not the hope of what they might have been. Gerald had quietly, methodically, and without telling me, restructured his estate 8 months before he died. The lake house in Michigan, the one Daniel had always assumed would come to him, had been transferred into a trust for Patricia's children. A significant portion of Gerald's savings, which Daniel had also expected to share equally, had been redirected to a veterans charity Gerald had supported for years. Daniel's share of the estate was not nothing. But it was a fraction of what he had expected. The estate attorney had already sent the formal documentation. I had received it, read it twice, and placed it in my own file. I had not yet told Daniel. I sat across from my son in that kitchen, listening to him explain his difficult position, and I held that knowledge quietly inside me like a stone. The estate letter arrived at Daniel's address 6 days later. He called me within the hour. His voice was different this time. The softness was gone. He was measured in the way people are when they are angry and trying not to show it, that tight, careful tone that fools no one. He asked if I had known about the changes to the will. I told him I had found out after Gerald passed. He asked if I had contested it. I told him I had not. There was a pause. Then he said, Mom, Dad wasn't well. He wasn't thinking clearly toward the end. Something like this, a decision this significant, it could be challenged. I let him finish. Then I said, Your father was the clearest thinker I ever knew. Right up until his last breath. The lake house was supposed to come to me. We talked about it. He told me. He told you a lot of things, Daniel. He also asked you to come to the hospital and you came 4 hours after he was gone. Silence. I had not planned to say it that directly. But there it was out in the room between us, and I found I did not want to take it back. Daniel said he needed time to process everything. He said he might want to speak with a lawyer. He said this in a way that was meant to frighten me, I think, to remind me that he had options, that this wasn't finished. I told him calmly that he should do whatever he felt was right. We hung up. I sat in Gerald's chair by the window for a long time after that. The backyard was overgrown now, the birdhouses weathering without anyone to tend them. But the yard was still beautiful in its way, full of things Gerald had planted that kept growing without him. I thought about the 4 words Daniel had said at the hospital door that night. He had looked at me, his mother, standing in a hospital hallway at 11 p.m. with her husband dying 20 feet away, and said, This isn't a good time. And then he had left. I had never told anyone those exact words. Not Patricia. Not the neighbors. Not the pastor. I had kept them folded up inside myself because saying them out loud would have made them more real, and I had not been ready for that. I was ready now. I picked up the phone and called Patricia. I told her everything, the letter, the will, the phone call with Daniel, and the 4 words at the door. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Mom, Dad knew exactly what he was doing. She was right. Gerald always did. 2 months later, Daniel contacted the estate attorney. He had spoken with his own lawyer and been told, clearly, that Gerald's will was structured legally and soundly and reflected the documented intentions of a man who had been entirely competent at the time of signing. The challenge went nowhere. Renee, from what Patricia later heard through a mutual acquaintance, was furious. There were reportedly arguments. There was reportedly a period of things being very tense in their home. I did not take pleasure in that. I want to be honest about that. I did not want my son's marriage to suffer. I did not want chaos in his life. But I also did not feel responsible for it. Gerald had simply told the truth, the way he always did, in the only language that some people finally hear. It has been 14 months since Gerald passed. The lake house went to Patricia's children as Gerald intended. Patricia took the kids up there last summer, and she sent me a photo of them on the dock, 3 grandchildren I love completely, squinting into the Michigan sun. I printed it and put it on the refrigerator. Daniel and I speak occasionally now. It is polite. It is careful. It is the conversation of 2 people who know each other very well and are both being very cautious. I do not know if that will ever change. I hope it does. But I have stopped building my piece around what Daniel might eventually decide to do. I tend Gerald's backyard now. I am not as good at it as he was. I've lost 2 rose bushes and I'm not entirely sure what happened to the herb garden, but I go out there on Saturday mornings with my coffee and I try. The birdhouses are still standing. What I know now at 71 is this: love is not measured in what you say during the easy moments. It is measured in where you are during the ones that cost you something. Gerald knew that. He lived that quietly for 44 years. And in the end, even from a hospital bed, even without a voice left to speak with, he found a way to say it one last time. His life was his message. His will was his final signature. I am still learning how to live without him. But I am learning it in the house he built, in the yard he planted, surrounded by the truth of who he was. And that is enough. That is more than enough.